Smile,
Okay.
Jim.
All right, so everybody's got to stop at their ridiculous jokes now.
Mhm.
All right. So I was going to do 19th and 20th tonight, but 20th is going to take too long. And 19th actually takes me a little longer than I thought. So I guess we're just going to stick with 19th tonight. We'll get back into the 20th next week. 20th is presidential terms, and there's a lot to it, at least reading. So I just don't think we could do them both justice. And do them both tonight. So we're going to get into 19th, which is kind of timely for today, because I don't know how many of you women that are here voted, but this is your amendment. This is the amendment that gave women the right to vote. Finally, after a long time. And what we'll learn here is how long suffrage was really going on for. It's not like this was something that started in the early 1900s. This has been going on since just a few years after we became a nation. Women decided that the Declaration of Independence should probably apply to just about everybody. So we'll get into what it says first. Pretty easy. We could just burn through this here in probably 10 minutes. Hopefully you guys will have some comments and some discussion on this. But what it says is that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That's it. And with
Burn through it in 10 minutes, just like dinner. I said burn through it in 10 minutes, just like dinner.
Right. Okay. Now see. This is what I'm talking about. Listen, I am the dad of 3 daughters, so I am very glad for the 19th Amendment. Passed by Congress on June 4th, 1919, ratified by the states August 18th, 1920. And I'm sure what is an unrelated development, in 1920, politicians began to care very deeply about what issues were important to women, since they just had millions of new voters added to the rolls overnight. So in August of 1920, politicians became very concerned about women's issues. Before that, they didn't really give a crap about what women thought. Before this, and you remember that it was just old white men, basically, white property owners that were allowed to vote. Women came long after even blacks being allowed to vote. So women really had to fight, and we're talk about suffrage here, but women really had to fight for this. So getting into suffrage, beginning in the 1820s, American women began having prominent roles in many reform groups like abolition. They began to take leadership roles and decided that, and that's really where suffrage started. That's where they decided that they wanted the right to vote. It was kind of informal until 1848. But in 1848, we have Elizabeth, I guess it's Katie Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, and that was the first convention where they really started talking about women's right to vote. Convention produced the Declaration of Sentiments, which you can look up, which stated and started with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Where have we heard that before? "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So we've heard almost these exact same words before. However, they added 2 words to it, "and women." And with that, the fight for women's, for their right to vote took off. Questions, comments on anything yet? So everybody knows Susan B. Anthony, and Susan B. Anthony got involved with this once. So what happened was that they started these regional suffrage groups. Eventually, and we'll talk a little bit about it here in a minute, but eventually they became a national group. And once they became national is when Susan B. Anthony got involved with it. I guess everybody probably knows who Susan B. Anthony is, since they have her on the since they had her on her own coin. But I bet not many people knew about Elizabeth Stanton and Lucretia Mott. And there is, I mean, obviously reading you can do when we leave here. The stories are pretty interesting. And the story about how this thing got ratified is especially interesting. We could almost have an entire episode, an entire meeting on the person responsible for getting this thing ratified. So suffrage continued. States began giving voting rights to women before the 19th Amendment. The Alaska Territory, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming all allowed women over 21 to vote. Now, that's obviously not all votes, or not all states, and that's why we needed this amendment, was to compel those states that were not allowing women to vote, to compel them to allow women to vote. Wyoming is the one who started it off. I don't have the dates here in front of me. Wyoming started it off when they were just a territory before they got admitted to the United States. Once they got admitted as a state, they carried it over into their constitution and maintained all along the right for women to vote. So it's not like this was something where women weren't allowed to vote at all in the United States. States were coming around on it. Federally, I don't know. I don't know if women were allowed to vote in federal elections or just state level elections, to be honest with you. I probably should have looked that up. But they were able to vote in all of these states.
It's interesting that the majority of these states are either in the West or in the plains.
Yeah, we had a lot of trouble with the South again. And we'll talk about that. The South again was the holdout. The South is slow to come around on just about every amendment, I think, that we
But I mean, even the East.
Yeah.
Other than
Well,
New York,
I mean, you got
there's-
Michigan, you got New York.
That's about it. Everything else is plains or west.
No, you're right.
So one of the things I'm reading here from Time said that about half of the states, those 18 that you mentioned, some Americans, including Black women, were allowed to vote in local, state, and federal elections prior to the ratification of the 19th Amendment.
Okay. Well, and I guess it should have been, right? I mean, at that point, it was a states' rights issue.
Mhm.
Nowhere in the Constitution did it prohibit women from voting. Yeah, there was something I read. I don't know, I'd have to look it up. Nowhere did it actually prohibit women from voting, and nor did the verbiage really prohibit. Not until the 15th Amendment, 14th Amendment, was the word male ever used in the let's see here. Give me one second.
Well, I mean, the fact that you had to be a property owner precluded many women from voting, right?
Well, it did. Yes, married.
Plus, I don't think women were allowed to own property, were they, in a lot of states?
Right, that's what I mean.
If you were married, you were not allowed to own property. I mean, your job was to be home taking care of your husband and making dinner, you know. Bill of Rights. Let me see.
So this is an interesting article
What's that on Time?
in Time. Yeah, I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're here. There's a whole lot of reading we can be doing on these things. You know, this is just a real quick overview of how we got to where we are and what the Constitution says. There's a whole lot of interesting stories about this stuff that are buried, especially the suffrage movement is pretty interesting. 13, 14.
I think it's really interesting that it took 50 years to give women the right to vote after Black males, when back then society considered Black males ignorant, and husbands were living with their wives and obviously having some intellectual conversations. And so they must have seen some intelligence in women. And then for legislation or other voters to think that a woman wouldn't be subservient to her husband and just vote with her husband if they gave her the right to vote. Like those two things didn't line up to me. And then I started thinking about like, maybe they suppressed the women's right to vote because of fear. Like maybe they were afraid that they saw women's intelligence and women would have an uprising if they gave them an ounce of power. And something like the suffragette movement or the feminist movement in the 70s, women's lib would happen, which it did. And we saw that fear with when they did give blacks the right to vote, because then they went and gave them those hard tests because they sensed that they have intelligence, and they tried to make it so that nobody would be smart enough to pass those tests. And that was fear driven. I think they did the same thing with women.
I think you
I
are,
respectfully disagree.
do you? Because I think it makes perfect sense to me.
That makes sense too.
Yeah, not in the beginning. I think that didn't happen until Rockefeller funded the feminist movement, that they
You know,
started thinking that females were going to have a different voice from their husbands. I think when this first came about, it was probably understood that there wasn't going to be a wife that voted opposite her husband. It was to increase the number of the votes for the well-established who were married, who typically vote in favor of the people in power.
is that your opinion, or are you getting that somewhere?
That is my educated guess.
Because that also makes sense. But Daniela might be onto something though. And I wonder if it ever factored into the fact that, you know, there was a lot of things happening, right? Well, although, I mean, blacks had already been given the right to vote, but a lot of things happening where I wonder if they were worried about, and I don't mean this derogatory at all, but like the emotional side of women, the motherly side of women, you know, where they were going to vote for, you know, civil rights and for the blacks to be able to vote, and because they know that's what was right, instead of the stodgy old men who were just going to keep voting the way that things had always been. So I wonder if that was part of it, if they didn't want that motherly instinct that was going to look out for, I guess, the social side of things. Does that make sense? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that makes sense.
I could be
Well,
off.
It was
But-
demonstrated already that the women's rights advocates were siding with abolition. Like they were already showing that they were the allies to end slavery.
Now, one of the interesting things is that the suffrage groups were kind of split on the 15th Amendment. Let me see here. Yeah, they were split on the 15th. So some of them were all about giving the blacks the right to vote, but there was a good number of them that were against the 15th Amendment, because kind of like the Me Too clause, right? They were thinking, well, wait a minute, we're going to give them the right to vote. We don't even have the right to vote. And so they actually fought, they worked against the 15th Amendment, not so much that they believed that the blacks didn't have a right to vote, just that, hold on, we're putting all this work in here. Where are we getting, we're not getting anywhere with this. Why should we give this group the right to vote? Now that all changed when they became a national organization. Obviously they got a little more on board with each other, but suffrage groups all formed into one national group, began protesting in DC. I thought I had more for that. So they all formed into one national group. They began protesting in DC, and this is where you hear about the women. They took a beating. They ended up in jail. A lot of them got hurt. This was not oh, look, this is cute, women want to vote. This was a beating women down because they were out here speaking and wanted to vote. You know, they were being arrested, they were being thrown in jail. These women, I mean, it goes right along with the rest of the civil rights movement, right? Where blacks were coming out and being beat and being thrown in jail. The same things were happening to women over this.
Is it real quick? Is this in certain parts of the country or is this overall north, south, east, and west?
The suffrage movement?
Well, no, where there was a big uprising against that. Were there any parts of the country that said, you know what, it's a good idea, we're gonna go for it right away? Or did
Well,
everybody
you've
just
got
say
these,
no?
you got 18 or 19 states that were already on board with it. All those states that I read, they were already on board with women's rights to vote. So my guess is that they were probably on board with it. But I think I just wonder if it's like everything else. Like, was the problem the people and not the legislatures? Was the problem just the regular guys that were like, man, these women are getting uppity. We need to stop this right now. Who do they think
Well,
they are?
It's
You know?
really funny because this Time article it's got a myths and reality. And one of the things here is the myth is that all women wanted the right to vote, but some women opposed the 19th Amendment. And there was an anti-suffrage poster by the Oklahoma Association opposed to women's suffrage that said the history of all states where women have the vote proves there is nothing to be gained by women's suffrage. Women stand to lose, much to lose by suffrage because suffrage demands equal rights. Where men only vote, women enjoy much superior rights and privileges. A strong nation can be built only on strong homes. The philosophy of women's suffrage is a blow to the home, at the home. To the suffragette, the father is but the casual parent, and maternity, in the words of Mrs. Pankhurst, becomes a protected industry. Women's suffrage is a fundamental principle of socialism and represents that theory of government which says the individual is the unit of society and not the family. The boys who will come back from France have not been fighting for women who would be quote unquote imitators of men, but for the type of women represented by their mothers and grandmothers. Women's suffrage deprives women of her greatest political power, which is her nonpartisan power in the community. Enfranchised, she must become the member of a political party. The following words of Mrs. Pankhurst in October's Everybody's are a great revelation as to the aims and ideals of suffragists. She will never again be reconciled to a round of bedmaking and dishwashing when she has proved her economic worth, and her very maternity will take on the status of a protected industry. After the war, millions of men will be mustered out of active service, but of the millions of women whom the war ministered into industry, not one will be mustered out. And who will wash the dishes and raise the babies? It is significant that, as stated by W.W. Gregg in the New York Times, September 15th, in his article, The Third Sex, all of the 8 foremost leaders of women's suffrage of the present day are childless. Very interesting.
It's very interesting
So
because
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that I don't necessarily disagree with all of that. I listen. I'm glad that women have the right to vote. They should have had the right to vote all along, but it's pretty foretelling. I mean, you look at a lot of the problems we have now, and it is because the homes are broken, because there aren't people. We're just not spending the time that we did in the 50s with our kids, right?
I would like to raise a point for the post, if somebody could remind me.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll remind you.
Because I don't want to talk about it here.
Yeah, it's
I
gonna be
understand.
amazing. No, I'm definitely going to be there. But yeah, I mean, I guess I understand the fear there and where it's coming from, but you got to remember too, though, that generation still exists.
Mhm.
There are still, these, the seniors among us, the 80, 90-year-old women that still believe it is their job to take care of the family, to take care of their husbands, to always cook dinner, to bring, I would see it with my in-laws. My mother-in-law would always bring my father-in-law's food out. I mean, that was just her job. It wasn't his job to get up and go get it himself. So, that's the way it had always been. The men
But
had always gone out to work.
But I still kind of think that way. I want to be the one to take care of a lot of things. I mean, I just.
But I think it's harder to do when you're not home, right?
Right.
When you're
it
out
is.
working, right? When you're out working 80 hours, 80 hours a week, some of these women, these professional women, it's hard to be able to take care of the family, and the kids do suffer. The kids need their mothers, let's all admit it. I love being a daddy, but my girls need their mom, man. It is
Should I-
hard, and I'm
should
not
I-
saying that she needs to be home, but for every give, there's a take, and
Should I
yeah.
wait? Should I wait for the post to bring this up?
Well, I don't know. Is it
About
related to?
about the women's movement in the
Yeah, it's a discussion. I
60s,
mean, as
early
long as we're respectful here, I
70s,
don't see any
where
reason why you
we-
can't bring it up.
you bring women into the workforce because you can't tax somebody who's not making money, all right? And you destabilize the home, you institutionalize the children, make them dependent on the state as the child rearers. And now this was funded by Rockefeller, mainly the women's lib movement, to get women out there in the workforce. And I think there are some motives behind it that we can talk about later, but that was the whole goal. It wasn't so much to give women their freedom and give women their equal to men rights. It was to create a society where more people are dependent on the state
Well,
to increase their power.
that's exactly what this thing said. Women's suffrage is a fundamental principle of socialism. So a lot of people were thinking that way. I don't know that there's some truth to that. There's a little bit of things that I kind of agree with some of that.
But when you're talking about the right to vote, though, if it was simply the right to vote, why would they be against that? Because you could certainly go vote and then come back. And I understand what she's saying, that once you give them this power, that now you're opening that Pandora's box. But you could certainly go vote and come back and take care of the family if that's the role you wanted.
Right.
It's not like just giving them simply the right to vote was going to end, in civilization as we knew it.
It's the
But
gateway
it-
drug.
But it
It is
does
a gateway drug, man. It's a lot of freedom, right? So now,
But
yeah,
it deprives the woman of her greatest political power, which is her nonpartisan
right.
power in
Partisan.
the community. I mean, look at what's happening with education and it just seems like everything is becoming political. And
But-
sometimes you just don't want it to be.
And that's a way to divide the home.
Yeah.
Before this, you had the family was such a strong unit
Sure.
that they would vote together. But now
Correct.
you didn't
have Democrats and Republicans. You didn't have liberals and conservatives living under the same roof.
right.
Well, this
but
takes
now
me
you
to-
give suggestions. Oh, you can vote your own way, and I'll vote my way, and that splits the home, not just politically, but as the foundation of a household, of a family. That kind of puts a dividing wedge in there between the heads of the household, which
No,
is
I-
dangerous for the
If I may,
continuity
here.
of the family.
So there's a popular organization right now that on their website very recently said their whole plan is to disrupt the Western nuclear family. And you take something like that and you look at like the women's suffrage movement, and this country was founded on biblical principles. And one of the big things biblically is that the man is the head of the household, but he is to love his spouse as one loves God in his own flesh. So when we get to these situations like this, where we're founded on a Christian principle, and then we've disrupted the whole family concept. That I'm going all over the place, but like biblically, right? Like the family is the number one church. It's the first church. And now you're getting these clashes where husband votes one way, women votes the other way. And theoretically, the way it's supposed to go is biblically is the man would make the vote. He would cast the vote, but he's voting in a way that is best for his entire family. And we've kind of lost that kind of family collective.
And maybe that had a lot to do with women who did feel oppressed by, some of their spouses that weren't respecting them and weren't listening to and doing what's best for the family. And,
You just find a middle ground somewhere.
yeah. Kathy's got her hand up. I'd be interested to hear.
Well, we all have free choice. Giving women the right to vote, in my mind, is not saying, oh, now that we've done that, there's just no decisions that can be made that affect your family, right? It's just automatically you're going to be giving up, the collective family and doing things for the individual. I mean, I know a lot of families that, the wife works simply to support putting the kid in childcare, which to me is just like, I don't get it. That's their choice.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying. It's a choice, whether or not
Well,
you
you
your
know what?
family even together.
Is it a choice that the woman has to work now? Or has it been designed to increase cost of living so much that both parents need to work?
Yeah, but
It's
what
a
you're saying
choice.
though
It's
is,
a
I mean,
choice.
hard.
when you're
It's a
working
ch-
strictly to make enough money for childcare, I mean, how much,
Right.
how
It's
much,
a
how much,
choice.
Yeah,
You're,
but
I mean, you're if
is it,
your lifestyle needs to be dependent on two incomes, that's a choice.
Mhm.
Now,
It is a
I mean,
choice.
unless we're talking about, putting food on the table and shelter and
right, you've
clothing,
got,
and that's
right.
it.
But you're talking about, you've got cell phones, you've got Netflix, you've
Right.
got 2 brand new cars, you've got,
Exactly.
right.
So that's a choice.
Hmm.
Well, and that goes into the societal pressure right now. Like women in a lot of ways can't choose to stay at home because it's actually pressure has been reversed. If you stay home, you're like an anti-feminist. You're not about women, societally. Obviously, there's a lot of places that's not true, but there's a lot of pressure at the top levels of our country to
And
force
there's-
women into the workforce.
and
I
as a
will-
family unit, you got to keep up with the Joneses. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want your kid to relate to the other kids, you can't. It's hard to not give them things that keep them current with their peers.
Right.
Well, life is tough. I mean, we all grew up, well, at least I grew up. I mean, there were 5 kids in my family, middle class. My dad worked 2 jobs. My mom was stay at home. And we just we didn't even know what we didn't have. We were appreciative of what we did have.
Yeah. I think that what I can see is that maybe this movement, it just kind of started the trend to where we are, where we're not looking at, we're grateful for things that we do have, and that it played more into the keeping up with the Joneses, and it kind of opened up that Pandora's box that kind of said, hey, now we want more. I was at home for 8 years with my kids. I stayed home with them to raise them. And I will say, when it was time for me to try to figure out how I was going to pay bills and that, I felt really behind the rest of my peers that had gone to college, all the way through and had their careers and were starting, their families later. I felt really like I was a minority. It was tough. It was
Well,
hard for me.
and you were a minority, I'm sure, but look how you succeeded. Right. I mean,
right. And the thing is, though, that's just it. I think most people feel that pressure that staying home is a bad thing now. I mean, people look at it like, oh, you're a stay-at-home mom, and it's
You know what, Kathy? It's interesting you say, look how well you've succeeded. I guess it depends on your definition of success.
Mhm.
Because you can succeed staying at home and raising
and that's what
family.
I was going to say.
right. And
It does depend on your definition of success, because when the girls were growing up, my wife and I made the decision that she would stay home and be there to raise the girls. And I would not change that for anything. Now, it was tight. We were doing the whole thing on my income. Because of that, I don't have much, right? I mean, I got a good life. Don't get me wrong. I've got a nice house, but but it's still, man, it's tight. I never had a chance to save money ever because I was trying to do it all on my income.
Yep.
It was tight. There are months where I have to put bills off. There are months where I'm like, man, is this the month where my electric gets turned off? You know,
Right.
juggling bills. But I am successful. I am successful
Right.
because I did not put my kids in daycare. We were there for them through the entire thing, and they are going on to be extremely successful. They're doing great in college. They both have good careers on the horizon, and everything that I had to do, all the overtime I had to work, you know, okay, so I don't have anything in savings right now, but it's all worth it.
But
And
here's
and
the thing now.
that's my definition of success. Are you at peace with the decisions that you've made? I mean, we all have regrets, and we
Well,
all
not
say,
now.
"Oh,
not now
coulda,
because
woulda,
they're out of
shoulda."
the house and now I'm broke. Now I wish I had.
So
But-
here's the question, Jim. Now you've got these girls that are going to have successful careers. Are they going to be able to make the choice or feel like they can make the choice to stay at home and raise their children when they're ready to have children, if they're ready to have children?
Or are they going to marry soy boys and those boys will stay home with the kids?
Was soy boys? I don't know. That.
Soy boys. You know, I don't know. And I have one daughter going into a grossly predominantly male
Industry. Yeah.
male occupation, male profession. And there's gonna be a lot of pressure on her, man. There's not, you know, I just wonder when you're in a profession like that and you decide you want to take maternity leave. Oof. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Now I know Haley, and I'm not sure Haley's gonna have kids, at least not right off. I mean, Haley is, you know, she wants to be a pilot. She's in commercial aviation right now, and that is so she can travel. And she knows what'll happen if she has kids, right? Your traveling days are over. Now you're home. You're home every weekend. You're home every night. So,
Well, you know, on the flip side, over the last 20, 25 years, fathers have become more involved
True.
with child raising
have.
and rearing than they had way back when.
Preach.
Which, what?
I said preach.
Somebody said preach.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, you know, it's a give and take for both sexes when you're raising a family. And so it's not the same as it was way back during the suffrage movement.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, women weren't going out there and getting the jobs that the men had. The men were the ones making the money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
and
couldn't
now
stay home.
it's starting to even out. We're weeding out that toxic masculinity, you know.
Yeah, the toxic
Well,
masculinity.
And Jeff may have touched on this earlier, but all of a sudden the workforce doubled. So when the workforce doubles, what happens? Wages go down, and big businesses save money on labor.
And not just that,
And the
but
federal government makes
more
money.
taxes get collected. Yeah.
Federal government's making a lot more money. All right, so we got off a little bit here. I
Yeah.
mean, we're on because of the Time article, and it all intertwines.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to get moving here just so we can get out of here by 9. So within 2 weeks of being sent to the states for ratification, 6 states immediately ratify, or within within 2 weeks, 6 states ratify, including Ohio. By March of 1920, 35 states had ratified. They needed 36. Like with everything, the southern states weren't having it, and 7 having rejected it. It all came down to Tennessee for ratification. Now, there were other states there that could have ratified later on, and we'll talk about those, but those took a long time to come around. So it all came down for the passage of this amendment to Tennessee. And this is a pretty cool story. I didn't know this story until I started researching this for tonight. So Tennessee was a deciding vote and didn't look good for women being able to vote. Tennessee is a southern state, and they were going to side pretty much with the southern states. Their legislature was expected to toe the line, and they were in a 48-48 tie on passage. Came down to one representative, and his name was Harry T. Byrne, 23 years old, and it was up to him to cast the deciding vote. And at first, I say he was against it, but at first, Byrne was for it. He thought that this was a good thing. but politics being politics, they got to him and they turned him against the amendment. He was set to vote against it. Everybody knew it. Can you imagine at 23 years old, the weight that must have been on this kid's shoulders? It all came down to him.
But 23 was not the 23-year-old kids that we have today.
Well, agreed,
But,
agreed.
yeah.
But he was
But
only,
still, he was young.
he had only gotten elected at 22. I
Mhm.
mean, I think it's still safe to say he was a kid. I mean, he didn't, he's in there with these people that had been in the legislature for years. Obviously they got to him. He was doing what they wanted him to do because he was for it. And then they were able
So
to talk him
why-
into turning against it.
What did they do to get to him?
Well, I'm
I
sure
mean-
it's just like
Pressure.
politics now. Sure. It's
Yeah.
just pressure.
Peer pressure.
You know what, you want a career here, kid, this is how you have to vote, I'm sure it's just like it is now. You send these young doughy-eyed 25-year-old kids to Congress who think that they're going to be able to change the world, and they get there. and
No,
then
I mean, I was
no.
wondering if they made an argument that he actually bought versus just.
Everything I
pressure.
was reading,
A
I don't
strong
think,
arming him.
yeah, I think it was more strong arming.
Okay.
From everything I was reading,
Publicity.
I don't think there was some kind of, deal that he sat in and listened to the arguments going back and forth. And he says, well, that might be the way to go. I think it was more of a strong arm.
I think somebody sat him down and said, you know how many ladies you're going to get if you vote yes on this?
Yeah.
Brad, can we, Renee, stop recording? I need to admonish Brad. I think you might be right, actually. I don't know.
Okay.
So anyway, Harry Burns. So while he was against it, he was also a very loyal son, and his mother sent him a letter which convinced him to vote for the amendment. And you can find the actual letter on online that she sent him. And he was the ratification vote. His one vote that he cast gave you the right to vote. The 19th hero, there he is. Now, it obviously did not have too bad of effect on him because he remained active in Tennessee politics until 1971. He died in 1977.
Wow.
And there was some other stuff through Wiki that I was reading about him where there was some voter fraud that had happened in his district, and he was responsible for basically cleaning it up in Tennessee, cleaning up the elections, cleaning up the fraud that had happened. He appears to have been a pretty stand-up guy. He did run for governor in the 30s, was defeated, but stayed active. He was part of Tennessee's constitutional conventions.
Well, he respected his mother's
rating.
opinion, so
Well, his mother's the
that's all
one.
you need to know there.
Yep, he did. And you can read the letter. It's pretty neat.
It is.
When
Oh,
Did you
Abigail
find it?
wrote John
Yeah.
Adams, like, remember the ladies, she did the same thing to influence him.
Mhm. Yep. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. We could almost have a whole meeting just on this guy, but I just wonder how many of these guys are out there, with these interesting stories in these state legislatures that
Hurrah and vote for some.
had big effects on things, man. But this 23-year-old kid, man, he did what his mom wanted him to do. He did what he knew was right. It's not like he just did it for his mom. He knew it was right. And I think mom convinced him that, look, make the right decision here. And he did. So how it all ended, 8 million women voted in the first election post 19th Amendment. It took 12 years for the remaining states to ratify, with Mississippi, again, I think they were the last ones to ratify slavery, with Mississippi being the last in 1984. They finally ratified the 19th Amendment. So I love the South. I love the people in the South. But man, the South are kicking and screaming into the 20th century. They did not want to change. They did not want blacks to vote. They didn't want women to vote. The South is they're the problem child. The ones that broke away from the Union. I love my South. I'm going to move down there. It's just funny to me. Mississippi seems to be, I think it was Mississippi before. Didn't we talk about them before? Weren't they the last to ratify again?
Yep,
I think it was
Yeah, it
slavery,
was in the
it
80s or
was.
something.
Mhm.
right? And I think it was pretty recent that they finally caved in and said,
90s.
all right. I would have to go back and look.
Yeah, it was just the black vote, I think, wasn't it?
I don't think it was, I think it was slavery.
Oh, that could be.
I
Yeah,
think it
I
was,
mean,
I think it was to end slavery. And I think Mississippi was the last state to agree to that.
I think you did tell us it was Mississippi. It was like in 2012 or something silly.
Yeah, it was, and it was just a symbolic vote, but yeah, it was in the 2000s that they finally said, all right, you know what, no more slavery. So, I mean, Mississippi, you gotta, I guess you gotta respect them. I mean, they know what they want, and they're the last holdout every time. They're also one of the poorest states, if not the poorest state in the union. So apparently what they're doing is not working very well, but man, they're committed. They're committed if nothing else. So that is it. I think we're done with the 19th. I'll bring up Mr. Byrne again because all y'all women that went and voted today, you owe them a debt. At least thanks.
It's funny because this letter is very, very, it's 7 pages of like the old style, what was it, 5x7 letter writing, but it's like one little paragraph about it.
Yeah, it was. It's one small paragraph where she tells him.
Hurrah for, let me see if I can find that line again. Hurrah and vote for suffrage and don't keep keep something in doubt. I can't read her handwriting there. I noticed Chandler's speech. It was very bitter. I've been watching to see how you stood, but have not seen anything yet. That's about it.
There's
more over here. Yeah.
Part in the paragraph about putting the rat in ratification.
Yeah, hang on. I gotta find.
Talk about a guilt trip. Jeez.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but you got to remember, he was already for it. He was already for it before they got to him. So it probably didn't take a whole lot for him to get swayed back. And you know what?
So
in that time, God, I don't know, man. Maybe they were as career oriented as they are now, but I just feel like he would much rather disappoint some congressmen or some state senators than he would his mother.
Mama said,
yeah,
Honor thy mother.
I vote for them.
Yep.
You will honor thy mother and thy father.
Their
Your mom
mother.
tells you to do something, man, back then, and that was it.
I think.
So, yeah, it's a pretty neat story.
Mhm.
So that's the 19th. Hopefully you guys voted today since you were,
Absolutely.
and you voted as a thanks and acknowledgement to the hard fought suffrage movement. All the women that were beaten, thrown in jail and chastised and ridiculed, everything they did for you. So the two that started it, I think they died in the early 1900s, 1902 or so. And that's when, God, what's her name? Renee, if you could tell me, it's right there. Lat, I think it's Lat is her last name. And she was a young girl that took over as they were getting older. So it's kind of sad that, the two that started this, and Susan B. Anthony, I believe too, died before that, never got to see the fruit of all their hard work. So.
Okay, Stanton. Yeah, I would have.
I think our outro song should be Pearl Haggard's No One Could Steer Me Right, but Mama Tried. Mama Tried. You know that song? I
What's
turned 21 in prison, doing life without parole. No?
What's happening right now?
Daniela,
Somebody call 911.
Stick to your day
I
job
think-
of arresting
I
domestic
think
terrorists.
Daniela may have had a stroke. Somebody please call. 911.
He's a huge country
I'm
music
trying
fan.
to find your lab person here.
I'm almost sure it was Lat.
I'm trying to recover from being in Ohio today. It's a weird place. I need to heal.
You were in
Oh,
Ohio.
geez.
What were you doing in
Yeah.
Ohio? Were you
I deliver copper pipes to Cincinnati.
scouting?
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati. That's got to be a
What?
haul for you.
Why did the town say like corp limit instead of town limit? End of corp limit.
Corporation.
Corporation.
What? Like it's incorporated? Like I didn't get it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just stay away from Cincinnati. It's not a good place to hang out.
Oh, it's not that bad, but
I don't
Oh,
know.
I
I
hate
think
it.
it is
Barely
bad.
Ohio. It's practically Kentucky.
It was
I hated it.
it's
beautiful.
very close to Kentucky.
Should be
All
Kentucky.
the hills, and I went to Springville Cemetery, and I went to the tree house at the park there. It was gorgeous.
Yeah, I didn't like living down there.
All right. So do we have anything else?
Uh,
I'm posting some articles in our resources, so I'll make sure to post that. So
yeah, so my heritage guide here. I just thought that was kind of interesting, and that is where I saw it. It's contrary to popular belief, the United States Constitution of 1789 is a gender neutral document. Throughout the original text, the framers referred to persons as opposed to male persons and used the pronoun he only in the generic sense. The word male did not even appear in the Constitution until the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. So, and that was one of the big things with suffrage is they were saying, hey, look, it doesn't say he. It doesn't say he. It says, you know, it says all men are created equal. And we talked about that. That was more in the generic sense. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They don't really even have a gender pronoun there until the 14th Amendment from the Constitution. So that's that. Any other questions? Any other discussion on it? On the 19th? Man, you think about
discuss
this
this
guy
on
too.
election day.
This guy lives until 1977. Would have been nice to meet that guy. I mean, I was alive. That it had to take big balls, man, to vote against your party like that. And really, though, are you voting against him? Because they were at a 48-48. So there was half of them at least that were on his side. But he stayed active till 71, so couldn't have been too bad for him.
He's
Just
like
look
the
at
Joe
him, man.
Manchin of his time.
Yeah, for real. I mean, that's a guy right there. It's just voting his conscience. He's not voting down party lines.
The
I don't
only
know
reason-
what
the only
was he?
reason
I don't
kept
know if he
getting
was
reelected
Republican
was
or
because he was
what's
being
that?
voted. I said the only reason he kept getting reelected because all the women were voting for him.
Hey, okay, smart move. Smart play.
Don't bite
I
the
don't,
hand.
and
that
you know what?
feeds you.
I don't remember. I don't know if he was a Democrat or if he was a Republican. Not that it matters. I mean, if you're voting your conscience, it's all somebody can ask. So
Well, apparently he was making his constituents happy since they kept reelecting him.
yeah, he was active until 6 years before he died. But then again, then that makes him one of those that we hate nowadays.
Started with
They're a politician.
he started with half the population on his side.
Yeah, true.
Yep.
That's a big deal, man, giving women the right to vote, because it's not just white women, it's women. They all had the right to vote. Now, granted, blacks, and we talked about that, were really until the 60s did they not truly have the right to vote. But yeah, we weren't just talking about white women here. We're not talking about old white women. We're talking about all women. So yeah, he did. He got half of them right on his side like that, especially because he was the guy. Well, again, maybe not quite half, right? Like Renee said, not everybody wanted it. But I'll bet more than not wanted it,
Oh, probably more.
I would guess.
Some of us are a strange minority.
And if
Yeah.
you think about this, the only reason he was the deciding vote is because he was the last one to vote.
Oh, sure.
Had
Sure,
he
but that's-
voted for it or against it earlier, then
Sure,
there
but
would've
that's
been
where history
somebody
put him.
else.
That's where history put him. History put him in a place where it was all on his shoulders, where he had to make that decision. It's crazy.
And that's what you call peer pressure.
Sure.
Yep.
Now, and maybe it would have, I'm sure. I don't know how long they had to ratify this thing. I'd have to go back and look at that. But well, unless it's spelled out, that it has to be ratified within one of the last ones we read there, prohibition was 7 years. Unless it's spelled out, it could last forever. So eventually it probably would have gotten, ratified, but it was only the southern states left to do it. So which one of those southern states was going to break away from the rest of the southern states to say, yeah, I mean, maybe it wouldn't have, I don't know. Who knows? But we don't have to wonder because Byrne did the right thing and gave women the right to vote. Well, I think the right thing.
North Ridgeville City Council at large, current with 14 of 24 precincts reporting.
Actually, you know what, Renee? We can talk about that since we're still recording. Anybody who's watching YouTube doesn't care about this.
That's true.
So yeah, we'll talk about that because I am interested in
We'll
knowing
talk about
how
it in a
this is
post.
going.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Virginia governor results coming out too.
oh no, that's going to be huge.
It's Youngkin right now by 10 points.
Yeah, but we'll see what happens by the morning.
Yeah,
All right. All right, stop.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to stop.
As soon as
Recording.
they stop counting. And
Yeah.
then start
Play our
counting
tune.
again, let's see.
Exactly.
So I'm going to stop recording right now and we will
Our tune.
in the